Oh, Ellen, I'm so excited about our conversation today. So we were chatting a little bit before we got on the recording, and Ellen and I had a chance to meet. Was it in, I guess it was the end of September. Was that correct?
In Austin,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, we shared the stage and it was so awesome because we had this sort of love connection across the stage. Like, I love you, you love me. We're going to talk about this at depth. Yes. So we're going to dive in. And so Ellen has such, you meet people that are like vanguards in the world. She's a neuroscientist. She was involved early in tech. She's a, women's societal understanding our role in the world and a menopause warrior. So Ellen, tell me, how did you get here? Like, that is such an exciting sort of background, and I think in a good example of what's really possible when we step into this next season of life and just like be who we're supposed to be. But I'd love to hear your story. It's so
Wow,
cool.
sure. So I will share that. But what I want to say first is I love how you said that because I really felt like all of my life I was collecting the dots, if you know what I mean. I was going out and having experiences, and I think I was reaching through many of those experiences to find an understanding and sort of a sense making that actually didn't make much sense to me for a long time. So you're right. Was really lucky. I had a career in tech. I was early at Apple, was honored as a digital pioneer for doing some very early things in the emerging online world, before email, before the internet, if you can, certainly before mobile phones. I also worked in the arts for a while. I really love the arts. And through all of it, I was bringing in an understanding of neuroscience and very much how an understanding of the brain can apply to the way we make sense out of life. But all of this dot collecting didn't seem to lead me anywhere specific until I entered this chapter that I'm in now, which is postmenopausal. And suddenly at that time, all of the dot collecting turned into dot connecting. And so I was able through that dot connecting to see some things systemically, almost like, you see stars in the sky, but until you see the shape of the constellation, you don't know what those stars are really about. And at this point in my 60s, very firmly postmenopausal, my biggest commitment is to using the lens of neuroscience mapped to an understanding of natural systems in the world, and very much where females fit into these natural systems. And Betty, between you and me, we don't really live in a natural system at this point. But when we look at the female and natural systems, we see a way of sustaining and thriving in life that is not available in any other way I've seen.
Oh my goodness, you're so right. And it's interesting. I was having this conversation over the weekend, a little bit with my husband and also with a girlfriend. And I think women tend to go into this menopause transition, and I would say overwhelmingly we have a positive attitude about it, right? There's a little bit of like, what happened here? Why does my body look the way it is? But I think we also, as a collective unit, start looking at it and looking for, again, like you were saying, that sort of constellation connection.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because I see a lot of the men that I talk to that go through obviously the same time period, and their perception is a little bit different. And I think some of it is stuff we're going to talk about today, like why do we live as long as we do, and why do women go through menopause? Because I think it's a role that we play. But do you see that sort of dichotomy between male and female experience of aging? Have you ever seen that yourself?
Yeah, maybe once or twice. Yes, profoundly. Because one thing that I've noticed as an elder is seeing how, in most aspects of Western culture, men are venerated and honored for moving through life because their value is seen very much in the capacities of their brains and their knowledge and their intellect and the value that they contribute and the status and wealth that they accrue. So they're looked up to as exemplars of people who have hit all of the, grabbed all of the brass rings of what it takes in society, right? Big old air quotes there. Women, and I do see it changing, and it's a very welcome change, tend to be more valued as, okay, I have to do a little bit of grammar nerd here. We're valued as objects rather than subjects. And grammatically speaking, the subject is kind of the star of the sentence or the phrase, and the object is the thing that happens or is affected by the star of the phrase. So we are the ones who are the product or the effect of a subject's agency. I know that's a little geeky, but forgive me. And in our culture, what I want to say is that men are really seen as subjects and women are more seen as the objects. It is changing. It is changing. Although it's also not changing. I mean, there's all of that too. But men are venerated for what they accomplish in life, and women are not. They become invisible because the things that they tend to be associated with in our culture, which is their physical appearance and the status that is associated with that, because we live in a very hierarchical and status-oriented culture. And then also our ability to be sexually desirable, on a reproductive level. Once that is over for us, we don't have some of the status that we're celebrated for in our younger years. That's not a fault with us. That's a fault with the culture. And it is also nothing like women have been over the long arc of human history, especially elder women have been over the long arc of human history. And actually, Betty, if you'll indulge me, how it shows up in the animal world. So did you know that female humans are one of only, we think about 6 animals, where the female goes through menopause? In other words, where the female becomes non-reproductive. And they're really cool animals. Most of them are toothed whales, including narwhals, the unicorn of the sea. I find that very interesting. But also some primates, subspecies of chimpanzees. We are rare. We're the few, the proud if we go through menopause. But there's all of these societies have something in common. One, their offspring, the children, take much longer to raise than most other species require. And so the mothers, and often a collective group of mothers in these species, are rearing and raising the children. But the big thinking things that lead to longer term survival become the work of the postmenopausal females. So let's look at orca societies. In orca societies, intergenerational knowledge transfer is key to survival. And so the grandmother whales who are non-reproductive are teaching the adolescent whales where the best hunting spots are, how to recognize cries from both calls, sounds from their own species or their own pod of whales, and then related but close pods of whales, which is very important in orca life. And then they are actually organizing seasonal things that involve, hunting times, reproductive times. They're showing where the best waters for calving are. All of these are the grandmother wisdom contributed by these animals. And it would only happen because there are postmenopausal, non-reproductive females who have the energy, the wisdom, the intelligence, and the experience to impart survival technologies onto rising generations.
I think that's awesome because it sort of builds the case for why we go through menopause and survive, right? It's I love the orca example. I remember reading this article about orca whales and how they had created a new attack strategy, particularly on great white sharks, because that happens to be a food source for them. And, they were attacking from multiple directions and actually eating their liver. Sorry, shark. Mm-hmm. But they attributed that to the older female figuring out how to strategize the entire group.
There you go. And by the way, I just watched you touch the side of your head. And was that the right side or the left side? I can't tell.
It was the right side.
Okay. I love this. I think we are intuitive neuroscientists. You touch the right hemisphere of your brain, or the right side of your brain. Big picture pattern recognition is the domain of right hemispheric thinking. It is not about linear pursuit. So, it is about not go out there and bite the shark, because that would be very left hemispheric, very outcome oriented. But the strategy side of the brain is the right side of the brain, the right hemisphere of the brain. And guess what? This is where we look at learning over time, complex pattern recognition. It is also the more estrogen-oriented side of the brain and associated with more, if you will, female neurochemicals and hormones. And this is the side where we solve big problems, and you intuitively touched it. So strategy would have been created or co-created by the matriarchs of this pod, coming up based on their learning and experience with ways of solving problems that had not been seen before, and then sharing that problem-solving technology in a way that all would benefit. I'm sorry, that's my ad campaign for menopause right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you touched on this, but I want to go back to it because the invisibility of an aging woman, we'll put it
Yeah.
that way, I like to call us seasoned, right? Seasoned and in our next act. That is a very westernized
Oh, yes.
experience. That is not what traditional societies have been and not from the ancient world. So paint a picture for the women out there because I think most women are like, yeah, I'm totally invisible. And how it would be different if we were living more like we have lived for millennia.
I'd love to do that. And then I also want to come back is before we commit to being invisible, let's decide what visibility really means in our culture right now. And visibility is based very often on superficialities that are not really about the genuine contributions we're here to make to the world, though. Let's get back to your question. I think there are many misnomers about the way we were as early humans, and even as we were as proto-humans. There is evidence of a pre-human species. It's unclear whether we are direct descendants of them, but they're called Homo naledi, and maybe some people have watched the movie about Bright Star Cave. It's a wonderful documentary where they were smaller than we are, and they existed about 440,000 years ago. But when we look at the way they buried their dead, it's very clear that 440,000 years ago, there was a reverence for life, and then there was the use of ritual that was really acknowledging a sense of what we would now call religiosity or spirituality of entering another world. There's some very interesting things in that documentary about how the smaller females were probably the ones who were able to enter this area in ways that even the slightly larger males were not. So females have been seen for a long time as the sustainers of life. And I have a number of friends who are child-free. They don't have children. And when I use that phrase, sustainers of life, it's been very interesting to watch how quickly they go to this judgment that they sometimes feel put upon them that says that they are meant to be the givers of life, the reproducers. No, the deliberate word is sustainers of life, because in early human societies, not all members were reproductive. In fact, life was so hard back then from just a survival perspective that it's very likely that if everyone had been reproductive or as easily reproductive as those of us who choose to reproduce are today, society would not have had the support and the infrastructure to really sustain. So there were probably aunties and uncles and very much grandmothers, sadly not as many grandfathers due to the work of men and also certain health things related to men. Men who are out hunting are probably going to be exposed to more risk than women who are more traditionally the gatherers in ancient society. But the robust society was made up of people who were contributing to things other than simply reproducing the species. I could go on and on about this, as you're probably noticing, but getting back to your question about why did menopause occur? There is a genetic fluke that actually happened where women who were living longer ceased to menstruate. And this is well documented now through the genetic record. It's fascinating things. And although these genetic mutations emerge very slowly, within a very short period of time, such as 10,000 years, which on the long arc of human history or even pre-human history is actually, it's a pretty short time, but it's enough to make a difference. These genetic attributes that favor survival grow so quickly in the population because the people who are surviving better pass them on to those who will follow. It's just common sense, right? You can do that math. And so very quickly, this non-reproductive chapter began to emerge, very likely. I mean, it's very much believed it was in Homo erectus, even before Homo sapiens, and favored our survival in ways that it became the dominant trait in these proto-human and human populations. If we look at long surviving human cultures, we see grandmother wisdom as being essential to survival. In the day we were all working, getting out and doing our things, which is a little bit more about the outcome and drive of the left hemisphere. When we came together at night and we became better and more sustainable humans, We sat around the fire. We heard origin stories. We learned songs. We favored other types of deeper and more pattern-oriented intelligence through the wisdom of elders and very much of grandmothers. And this served, I love to talk about species-level survival. If it's an attribute in modern human life, a biological attribute, it's only there because at some point in our history, in our lineage, it served species-level survival. This 100% served species-level survival. And you see it alive in the wisdom traditions of First Nations, indigenous, land-based, Aboriginal cultures today, where the grandmothers and the older aunties are very often the crucible that holds society together.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh, that is so, so real. There was, I'm going to probably mess up these statistics. I should have looked them up beforehand. But there were some statistics in a paper that came out not too long ago looking at the risk of death during childbirth, particularly in African American women. They're like 6 times more likely to die. Literally, a firefighter, which is considered one of the more dangerous, jobs, they would have to work every day for 3 years to have the same risk as a black woman giving birth.
Giving birth.
Right. Right. So the most dangerous thing a female can do is actually give birth, even today. I mean, and I'm in Texas, and we like to be number one in Texas, so we're actually number one in infant and maternal mortality in the United States.
Yeah.
Right. Which means we have really poor outcomes. But your discussion of the role of women, particularly in society, particularly the child-free women, of which I happen to be one, they were really there to make sure that as a group we survive, right? That species-level survival. So it makes sense that nature would select for this because it is the greatest risk we have as a female is to give birth.
You are right. And so I'm going to touch first on the thing that you said about modern day neonatal and maternal mortality, because this is just something that the health system should be like so deeply ashamed of, and B, so deeply committed to changing, especially for women who are marginalized in so many other ways in society. Like, that's a whole other conversation, and you are right. I have some statistics somewhere, and I think of all of the what's developed, and I'm doing air quotes here, countries in the world. We are like either at the bottom or second from the bottom, like the highest risk of maternal or neonatal mortality. And you're right, but up until 1900, childbirth was, for all women on the planet, the number one cause of death. And this does root back to evolutionary biology, because and I have some amazing slides on this. It's a talk that I've given. When we move from being quadrupedal, meaning walking on our hands and our feet and mostly living in trees, and we came down to the earth, which dramatically favored our ability to be resourceful and to survive in many ways, but also exposed us to risk that was not present when we were in the trees. Saber-toothed tigers were a thing, let me tell you. But when we did that, our pelvises had to narrow to support our bodies as we began to walk upright. And they had to narrow to actually support the viscera of the body, which used to be held by the abdominal wall when we walked around on our knuckles, like our gorilla kin and chimpanzee kin do. But walking on 2 feet actually caused the pelvis to narrow to such a point where the birth canal, and by that I also mean there's a name for the opening in the pelvis that a child would be delivered through, but also then the way the tailbone curved into that space changed everything about the way that birth happened. And I have a strong belief, and it's not something I made up in my imagination. It's based on paying attention to evolutionary biology, to primatology, to human history, and to a number of other things about, so many places we could go. But I believe that women knew much earlier than we give humans credit for to associate cycles of the moon with cycles of reproduction. And I believe, and many others like me do, there's a really brilliant book called Eve, which I'm happy to share a link to. It's quite a read, but some of the chapters are really powerful. But that women actually, we bleed differently than any other animal does too. Our periods, our cycles are very different from those of even our closest primate kin. But blood when you are out on the plane, we all know this from our camping trips, it's probably not the best thing, right? And so we did
Right.
need protection. We did need to come together as circles. And in those circles, we most certainly talked about what is this thing that's happening in ways that are associated with the moon. I believe that early women, early females of our species, and maybe even species beforehand, had a lot of knowledge about surviving childbirth because it was, I think it was one of the knowledge systems that emerged first as we became sapiens. And we had to work together, not only with each other as women, but very much with our men to make this extremely dangerous experience one that we could hope to survive. There's a chapter in the book Eve about Homo erectus and her theories of midwifery and even gynecology from those times that's actually quite eye-opening. We think that we couldn't be capable of such things at that time because we live in a modern world that's very medically oriented. But Betty, you know as well as I do, we women hold knowledge in our bodies in a very ancient and primal, sustaining of life way. Many of these knowledge systems were canceled out of us through culture, through, burnings at the stakes, through all of this. But we have a sense in our bodies of the natural world that could only exist if it serves species level survival. And something about these cycles of elderhood and letting go of reproduction are absolutely part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so for all the women that are listening, it's like, okay, so the lowdown on that whole conversation is in our entire human and almost human existence, women, and especially women in this time period, are the reason why we are still here. Just flat out. And that our knowledge and our intuitive knowledge is valuable despite the Western culture that we live in that says youth and beauty and, anything over 35 is a has-been, all that crap is
Right.
a modern day, bastardization of a woman's experience.
Oh,
And,
and
and that
so
it's beautiful.
misleading. It's so diminishing and misleading. It absolutely, and let's talk about intuition while we're at it. Intuition is a form of intelligence. Our bodies process information intelligently in different regions and en route to the brain. So there's some pre-processing that goes on. And Betty, I'm going to do it. You see me take my hand here, and I'm putting it down at the back of my neck right here, kind of where the skull begins. I know people who are listening won't be able to see it, but thinking that the brain ends at the base of the skull is a convenience of the dissection table. It is not fact. From the heart of the brain, the midbrain, the medulla oblongata, which actually becomes the spinal column, you could even say is the spinal column, radiating out into the central nervous system. All of this is intrinsic to the way we process intelligence in our body. And women with all of those wonderful, estrogen receptors and so forth distributed throughout our beings, we are collecting information in ways and processing information in ways that we don't yet understand. And simply because we don't yet understand it does not mean it's real.
Yeah, that is so, so true. And actually, I'm going to add a little nugget of nerdiness to that. We also know that our mitochondria, so the powerhouses that exist in pretty much every cell except for red blood cells, actually respond to stimulus before our central nervous system does. So we've got a collective intelligence that comes from the intracellular organelles, the little parts of the cell that make up our cell. So, and women are more tapped into that than men. Again, we have receptors even in our mitochondria for estrogen. And so what this also helps me understand is like when you look statistically, so women in high places, we're always fighting to fight the glass ceiling. But when we look at female-led companies, female-led organizations, they outperform male organizations within the same industry. But yet today, we still have to fight for our place at the table because of the patriarchy. And it's truly because we see things in a systems way. We look at human connection and how we bring people together on top of being highly decisive and moving things forward. And I think it's all of this sort of innate wisdom of the female body and our experience that plays into this.
I could listen to you nerd out all day, and I want to say brava, brava, brava. And part of this, Betty, that we speak about is the right hemispheric balance that female thinking, that women's brains do bring to the table. We do tend to see bigger pictures. We tend to recognize patterns in a different way. We have the right hemisphere is slightly slower in its processing than the left hemisphere is. And by slightly slower, I mean it's like the things like the left hemisphere can process certain types of thought at, point oh 3 seconds, and then the right hemisphere processes the same thought, but I'll come back to that in a minute, at like 0.05. So we're still talking like really, really fast. But I like to say the left thinks it's right even when it's wrong. The book Thinking Fast and Slow does not talk about the different functions of the hemispheres, yet it does talk about the two different forms of thought and shows how the slightly slower thought that challenges the fast thought tends to be more accurate, less problem-free, fewer consequences, and generally more strategic. Yet we live in a culture, a male-dominated culture, that celebrates and really worships, I'd say almost pathologically, at the side of left hemispheric outcome-oriented processing. I like to call it more, mind, now, new. And those are 12 words right there that can really describe our current culture. But this, the right hemisphere, is the blooming and expansion of a much larger picture, more cohesive, more contextual, and strategic way of seeing things. Now, what you say about female-led businesses and even female-influenced governments leading better, rising better, having fewer errors is absolutely true. Research from Harvard, Princeton, MIT, McKinsey, many, many more show that there's a little bit of a slower start when the female friction is there because we're challenging the fast and easy assumptions. But once we get past that friction, the implementations tend to be 42, I think it's like 87%, and who knows how they measure these things, more successful, more sustainable, better product adoption, and fewer errors when these products come to market. This is worth paying attention to.
Yes, certainly. Certainly. So women, yeah, we're supposed to be at the table, if not at the head of the table.
Yeah.
If you spend time with me in a boardroom, I will head to the head of the table, just so you know.
I love it. And by the way, that is the feminine power. And the feminine power is not something where we go, okay, I'm not going to make waves here. No, we are advocating for the big picture sustainability of life. We are here to make things better. And that often doesn't happen with a gentle, obedient, good girl voice.
So this is a good sort of transition to talking about some of the experiences we have during this time period. We often hear that this is the time period where we give no more Fs, no more fucks. We're done. Mm-hmm. And I think, up until this point, a lot of the times we're worried about what other people think and, where is our status. But there is this overwhelming, like, I don't care. If you don't like it, don't look. If you don't like what I have to say, then sit and be quiet because I'm not done yet. Seriously, like that's like I have never really minced words, anybody that knows me, but I will say that I'm much more outspoken and much more clearly willing to take the slings and arrows than I've ever been in the past. Mm-hmm. And that I attribute 100% to the experience of menopause.
Well, I want to absolutely celebrate you and add a heck yes. And I think that's something that you exemplify in the world that I'm really, really inspired by and that all of us can learn from. We do reach a point where two things happen. This is my opinion. One is that we realize life is short and nothing is promised. That's our big picture pattern recognition. We see so many things, and we've learned from our own experience of our own false starts, our own yearnings, the things that we've tried by following the rules that maybe didn't work out the way that we had hoped they would. And my blind spot that I had in my youth that I don't hold any longer and that I don't obey any longer is I really believe that everything would work out really well in the end. If you continue to work hard and contribute and do your best, all would work out well. I don't see that happening anymore. I think it is time for us to reclaim and take a stand on what we as women know is right, especially at this point in our lives. So, I like to think you're given you said no fucks given, so I guess I can say it too, right?
Totally.
I think you're given a basket of fucks to give when you arrive in this world, and you have to decide what you want to save those fucks for. It's a little harder to take this stand when you're seeking the approval and fitting in that tends to be associated more with younger life. But when you reach that point where, hey, if they don't like me anyway, or they don't see me anyway, then I'm going to do whatever I want. We discover a new way of giving a holy fuck that is so much in service to those who will follow. And this gives, at least for me, a hunger and a yearning to be of service and to contribute and to be valid. And for my sisters who are out there feeling the same thing, to step up to our power of who we are more than I have ever felt it before.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a good question. So obviously this time period of life happens for most of us, perimenopause to menopause transition, which is an average of almost 8 years for most women. Some of us get to have a little longer road. Seems to almost always occur when our offspring, not my experience because I'm child free, our offspring are somewhere between teendom, tweendom to college age, which is also an extraordinary hormonal shift. Like that seems like some sort of twisted gift because they are also at the height of passion and probably at the lowest point of discernment.
Lowest point of discernment. On all of those other people you mentioned, that prefrontal cortex has yet to come online. You know, it's only online around 20 or 21 for young women and much more like 22 or 23 for young men. And the prefrontal cortex is really where we become more reasonable, right? Where it's really what directs the brain towards sense making in a unique way, and often overrides risk or impulsivity and all the other things. So what could possibly go wrong, Betty?
I'm just like I'm thinking about everything that I hear in the clinic for the last 20 years, where it's like, you know, you feel like you want to have a knockdown drag out with your kid. You've got no patience for it. You know, they're like, moms are like, I'm irritable and I can't handle it and I just want to scream. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Luann Brizendine writes so beautifully about that in the female brain, and how the estrogen bloom that happens in teenage girls sort of happens concurrently with all of this sort of dissolution of self stuff that's happening to her mama at the same time. But, you know, a client asked me about this the other day, and what came to mind for me is that very often we became mothers if we look at our evolutionary biology, we were parenting at a much younger age, you know, generally right around 14 or 15 was usually when it seems, from what we know, a first child would have been born. And so by that time, you know, if we do the math on that, if first children are born around 14 or 15 years of age, and then, you know, usually childbirth would probably go on to let's just say the early 20s. I'm sure there were exceptions. But that means that the grandmother would have actually been more likely to have been in menopause at the time when her daughter was raising children, and she would then have that wisdom that she could look at. She would have seen these cycles of hormonal change in her sons and daughters, so it wouldn't have been her first ancient world rodeo, so to speak. And she would have a different type of understanding. She would know how to be with that rising, you know, adolescent at a time while her daughter was actually probably working with the other women of the clan to gather food, to prepare food, to be of service. And by the way, we have so many misunderstandings about hunter-gatherer societies. Did you know that in all known hunter-gatherer societies still living today, and in wisdom carried from those who once existed and are now have adapted to more Western ways, 70 to 80% of the caloric sustenance of the clan came from the gatherers. Mm-hmm. We were providing most of the nutrition. And the 20% to 30% that came from the hunters, our men, was critically important for the iron and the protein that it gave us. But it was the majority, it was the minority, it was not the staple. And I like to joke, and I don't really mean it as a joke. It's not a joke, I mean it seriously. I think that's how we should use our brains. I think we should use our brains about 70 to 80% right hemispherically, hunting, gathering, putting pieces together, winnowing, sort of going into the deeper weaving of thought, and only about 30 to 20% on the pursuit associated with trekking or hunting or outcomes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to really recognize, because that gives credence to the menopause, hypothesis of why we go through menopause and survive it, because we did bear children so much earlier and our lifespan was shorter.
Right,
But grandmothers were there stepping in when their daughters were in their late teens, maybe early 20s, to take
right.
care of the grandbabies,
That's right.
right?
And can't
Yeah,
you
we're
just
just
imagine?
procreating way later in life.
Oh, that's right. And can't you almost imagine, like, see if you can even feel this, like, imagine a circle of grandmothers and they're doing useful things as, grandmothers like to do, whatever those things might be. They might be, I mean, women definitely made tools and women definitely wove textiles to protect bodies and so forth. Whatever it was that they're doing, they're sitting in a circle, watchful eyes on the little kids running around. The kids are doing ridiculous things. What are the grandmothers doing? They're just laughing, they're rolling their eyes, oh, she's so much like that one, or something like that, just letting it all happen. And now, these women who are going through menopause, they're coming home from work, rushing out to get someone at a soccer game, all of this. It's not really aligned with the hormonal changes that, were kind of made in other times. And so, as I said, what could possibly go wrong? What it really raises in me is just a huge amount of empathy and compassion for hardworking menopausal moms who already have too much on their plates, who are already probably carrying a whole lot of stress, and then all of a sudden, boom, someone pulls the hormonal rug out from under their feet. Yeah, I have a ton of empathy, and it's not the natural way.
Yeah, it isn't. It isn't. But, that doesn't mean in this age group and this time period that we don't keep charging forward. Because
Right.
then if we look at, at least modern times where we've kept note of, women's contribution, the
Oh,
majority of the people we think about that are major contributors to science or literature or other things, they were all menopausal women, right? Because you didn't have time to mess with that stuff when you were running around raising kids and trying to get stuff done.
oh no. And look at the wisdom bearers that the planet looks to right now from across a number of cultures. So many of the voices that are really rising are elder women, postmenopausal women. I was writing down a few this morning, and names that I wrote included people like Robin Wall Kimmerer, an incredible botanist, professor, and indigenous wisdom bearer. She wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass, where if you want to read grandmother wisdom, it simply floats from every page of that beautiful poetic book. People like Oprah, like look at her wisdom, right? Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuroscientist who really is all about the balanced brain. Esther Perel, Pema Chodron, in our town where I live in New Mexico, Roshi Joan Halifax, a great Buddhist leader, and even people like, Elizabeth Gilbert, she wrote that beautiful book, Eat, Pray, Love. Trust me, at
Yes.
5 years old, that woman is showing up these days with the big picture elder wisdom in a way that's more relevant than ever.
Oh, yes. So I think women can really look at this time period, and yes, they may feel that things have changed and it's not exactly where we thought we would be, maybe, and we don't love it. But at the end of the day, this is our time period to not only step into our creativity, but possibly leave our mark,
And
for
we can
sure.
step into our power. It's a different power. So I would
Yeah.
invite anyone listening to think about species level survival right now, because none of us can deny. If they can deny it and back it up, I'd love to meet them, because sometimes I could use a little dose of hope. But none of us can deny that we're facing a number of really significant crises in our world and on our planet right now. If we will
Yeah. That's
reach deep into ourselves for species level survival, with that as our objective, what do our
yeah.
bodies know? What do our minds know? What have we learned over time through this gift that we have that the world needs to know more than it knows now? This is our invitation to offer the power that's been waiting in us for a very long time. And I really feel that elder women are the bearers of these survival messages.
Yep. It's funny that you say that, because, like, if I had a friend of mine ask me, we were talking about sort of what I feel like is the attack on, we've had an attack on women since this dawn of time, but it seems to be very, very, it is very, very dangerous times for us right now. and we were talking about the suffragist movement, right? The women who, fought for our ability to vote on the 19th Amendment. It took, 18 in front of it for us to get the right to vote. And I was thinking about it, and most of those women, Susan B. Anthony, Katie, all of them, they were menopausal.
Wow.
They were
Wow.
menopausal when they fought, when they went to jail. Because my friend's actual question to me said, Betty, are you willing to be loud enough to go to jail? I'm like, cool, I don't have a record. Maybe I need one now. I was like, for
Wow.
shooting my mouth off and saying what's right, I'm cool with that. I'm good. I think somebody
Love
needs to
that.
stand up.
I love it. Yeah.
And so for women that might be feeling that way, this is where most of those things happen. It wasn't a upset 20-year-old that, really made stuff happen. It was people in our age group. It really,
Bravo.
really was.
I love that. I had never considered that. And that is just such a powerful insight. It gets me really curious about what other women really changed the course of history and really took a stand once they entered that, well, what my friend Lucy Cook, who writes about these things, what she calls that queen orca phase, like where we
Yep.
really know we are the matriarchs with responsibility toward the future.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So we're getting close to the top of our time together. If you could wave like a magic wand and have some outcome for women today,
Yeah.
what would be? I know there's probably a million, but what would be one of the ones that tops your list? What would you love to see occur in your lifetime?
Well, this one is going to be different than sort of a measurable external outcome, although it will have a ripple effect, and that's trust your bodies, trust your intuition. I would love to see all of us women, reclaim so much more of our innate brilliance and power by remembering, and I love that word, remembering. It's almost a pun, bringing back into the body that sense of intelligence that is our birthright and also our gift to the world. It's a superpower. So I would love to see, even if only a few women who are listening right now just close their eyes and really felt in their bodies and really thought, after listening to this, what did they say that I knew all along? Because honestly, I think many people who are listening out there are going to go, oh my gosh, I've always felt that way, or I always sensed that was true. And then
Yeah.
once you go, oh my gosh, I knew it all along, then ask yourself, what else do I know in my body and in my being that I have not yet brought to the world? And finding the courage to share more of that, to shine more of that.
I love that. I love that. I think that's a huge parting note for all the ladies listening to Menopause Mastery podcast. Ellen, it has been so lovely having you on. We will make sure that we've got your website and your access points so people can reach out to you. And I know you do workshops and events, so we'll make sure that we get that information out and have it available to people. But I'm looking forward to getting to know you better. We're so in sync. It's so awesome.
I love it. Yeah, I actually feel you're having that mini-me moment. You complete me. Like the things that you say and the way that you say it inspire me so much because I'm quite a bit ahead of you on this beautiful journey of life. And I'm just so excited about all of the light and power you are here to bring to the world. So for that, I thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. Thank you so much for being on Menopause Mastery. And for everybody listening, if you loved this episode, share it with the beautiful women in your life. Help them by giving them this gift. And then we will be back with you next week. I'm gonna